On we go. All right, so I'm going to talk about the promise and paradox of creative AI. And if you'll notice that the I is colored red, and that's because this is a very personal story. There's a large part of research that I do around AI and so on, but this is more of my personal experiments. So first of all, thanks to the Universal Conference for inviting me to give this talk. My name is Punya Mishra, and I am currently Director of Innovative Learning Futures excuse me, at the Learning Engineering Institute and a professor in the Mary Lou Fulton College for Teaching and Learning Innovation at Arizona State University. This is my website and my email. Almost everything I do, I share on my website. So that's a nice place to go if you want to learn more. And I do reply to every email I get. So if you have a question or a comment or want to follow up, feel free to reach out. Just to give some context, because I'm setting this up as like a personal story, my background, my undergraduate degree is in engineering. After that, I wanted to become a filmmaker, but ended up working with educational technology, which has been my field for the past, I don't know, 34, 35 years or so. I do work in ed tech, creativity, teacher education, and this design idea has always stayed with me. So I always think of myself as an educational systems designer. I'm also a parent to two kids who are kids no more, grown up, but also been a school board member. So I've had a chance to look at education from a variety of different perspectives. And when I was thinking of what to talk about today, I decided to go into this space between engineering and design and how that sort of played a role to set the context, because this is a sort of a personal story. So I grew up in this place called Mizoram, which is the northeast part of India. Um, I was there till I was around 6 or 7 years old. And the point that I wanted to talk about there was that when I was a child, we did not have electricity. So our days were governed by the rising and setting of the sun. Every day was the evening ritual of lighting these lanterns, and we would study by it. And I remember the first time we got electricity, my just running from room to room, flipping on switches on and off, just amazed at the magic of it. And to think about, here I am sitting here talking to you from Phoenix, Arizona about artificial intelligence. I am not that old. I'm 60, okay, but not that old to have seen this sort of if you think about where it started from to where we are today. And if you think about the amount of information that we can hold in the palm of our hand, that's sort of a stone tablet to a cell phone to now this thing called AI. But going back to my sort of high school days, I was interested in pretty much everything. I used to love to read. I loved cinema, so I would read about science and math and art and poetry, you name it. I would read the back of a toothpaste label if I could. Um, but in India, if you're good at science and math, you either go into engineering or medicine. So I went off to do my undergraduate electrical electronics engineering at this place called BITS Pilani, which is one of the premier institutions in India. And that's where I think I called my 4-year transformation, where I went from an 18-year-old who loved science and art and poetry, and I was writing limericks about the special theory of relativity as a freshman. And 4 years just beat all of that out of me because it was all about exams and tests and so on. I do think it made me a better educator because it showed me that just that, that the system is much bigger than the individual at some level. And so part of my job, in some sense, as an educational researcher, educational designer, is creating better systems for education. But going on, at the end of those 4 years, I decided that I want to do something which would sort of meet both my creative as well as my sort of interest in science and math and so on. And so I decided to become an educational filmmaker, and I ended up going for my master's degree in visual communications at this place called the Industrial Design Center. And that's where I met this guy. And I'm talking back of 1984, no, 88. So there's Macs and Mac SEs with the floppy disks and all of that was the thing. But it really transformed the way I thought about technology and computing, and realized there was something interesting going to be happening at that intersection. So instead of becoming a filmmaker, I decided to go into the space of educational technology. One of the most influential things in that, I had learned programming using punch cards. And then there was this thing called HyperCard. And it allowed me to think about code and human computer interaction in ways that I had never thought possible. And in fact, just a few months ago, the person who created HyperCard, Bill Atkinson, passed away. And this is a screen from the blog post I wrote about a stranger who changed my life. I had never met him. but he transformed how I think about this relationship, this complex relationship between technology, creativity, and learning. And all the while I have, while my career is going on and I'm writing academic articles or doing my PhD or whatever, I play a lot with different kinds of media and particularly visual media. So here is one kind of wordplay that I do. I think everybody can read that word. It reads the word wordplay. But if you rotate it 180 degrees, it still reads the word wordplay. So that's a form of visual art called ambigrams. Here's one of my most famous ones. There are actually people on Amazon making money off this, selling it on t-shirts. You should be able to read the word good as well as the word evil. So evil is in the white spaces within the good. So these are the kinds of visual wordplay I love doing. So here's another one, which is just the idea of thinking about infinity. So think infinity, and there'll be a reason why I'm bringing up these examples, because I'll come to AI in a second. Also love math and poetry. So I have these poems that I've written about mathematics and poetry. This is one which is called About the Imaginary Number I. Another one which is a proof of Euclid's theory of a proof of the infinity of primes as a poem. I combine math and art in other ways, where if you look at, this is the word fractal. And if you look at it, you will see that the word fractal is written as a fractal. This is the word self-similarity, because fractals are self-similar. And if you see, so these are the kinds of things I just play with on, this is what I do during meetings. Just doodle away and then, create these things. So then we fast forward when we come to November 2022, where this creature enters our life. To be clear, AI has been with us for a while. If you use Siri, or if you use Google Maps, and if you use Spotify, Netflix, Amazon, AI has always been there. But something different happened in November 2022, when we realized that we could actually have a conversation with these technologies. That so far language was something that set us apart from the rest of creation as we knew it. We were the only creatures who could, converse in language. Every sentence we spoke could be unique and all of those things. And suddenly here was this technology that was doing it. And a large part of my research over the past few years and the writing I've been doing has been sort of exploring what this means. And my daughter calls me schizophrenic, because this is how I often talk about AI. There is parts of it which really excite me and parts of it which really concern me and worry me. But today's conversation is going to be about the part that excites me. So this is around the part around AI and personal creativity. If you want to know more about things that keep me up at night with respect to AI, please go to my website or reach out to me. There's a lot that I have written and I've talked about there. So if you remember, I'd given you this example of writing a poem which was a mathematical proof. So when ChatGPT came out, I said, how can this technology, what would this technology do if I asked it to write a poem which was a mathematical proof? Then I said, let me add another layer to it. And I said, can you write a proof which has a mistake in it, an error? So that would be sort of like a pedagogical tool, because I could give this poem to a student and say, okay, here's a proof. Now find the error in the proof. That's just me playing a game with AI. Now, what was insane was, with a couple of iterations, ChatGPT, this is the early version I'm talking about, wrote a poem as a proof. It was mathematically sound. It had inserted a subtle error in it, an error so subtle that there are actually websites on the web, mathematical websites, which have the same error. That's crazy. And I have linked all of these things that I'm examples I'm showing up all on my website. So you can go and read the whole transcripts, links to things, and so on. And this was my response. I was like, whoa. Because I realized that if a human had done this, written a mathematical proof as a poem with a subtle error, I would definitely call that human being creative, right? Because think of all it needed to, quote unquote, no, always air quotes, because I don't want to anthropomorphize this thing, but it had to understand poetry. It had to understand the proof. It had to understand what kind of mistakes humans make, and then mush them all together. And then at the push of a button, be able to do that in Portuguese or as a rap song. That is crazy. So this was one crazy, mind-blowing example. Here's another one. Very soon after ChatGPT, within like a year or so, ChatGPT and other tools started having this ability to interpret visuals, right? So this is what I call AI now can see. So this is an example. This is a photograph I took when I was a graduate student at Urbana-Champaign. And typically, if this is a live thing, I actually ask people what this is, but I'm going to just tell you what it is. It is a photograph of the ground taken below a tree during a solar eclipse. So what happens is the gaps between the leaves act like tiny pinholes, so you start getting thousands of little eclipses around you. It's a very beautiful effect. So I gave this image to ChatGPT, and I'm going to talk about, I've done this multiple times just to test out how good these systems are getting. In the most recent version, I gave this image, and on first pass, it said, in the first time I'd done it, it didn't get it right the first time. This time it got it right away. It said, it's a photograph taken during a solar eclipse below a tree. And this last time that I did it, I said, when was this photograph taken? This taken was in the 90s. When was it taken? So he said there were 4 solar total eclipses on the Earth that year, and it listed them. Said, I don't have enough information to tell you which eclipse this was, because one was in Peru, one was in the US, one was somewhere else. So this is what I told him. I said, my name is Punya Mishra. Does that help? And it said, I looked you up. You went to grad school in the 90s in Urbana-Champaign. An eclipse went over the Midwest at that time. So I'm guessing this was taken somewhere in the American Midwest, in Illinois, most probably. And to say that my brain was blown is insane. Similarly, I gave it a photograph that I had taken of some graffiti when I was in San Francisco. And I said, give me a semiotic analysis of it. And then I said, give me a Marxist analysis of it. And I said, compare the two. And this is, again, all of these examples are on my website. You can go and read what ChatGPT said. And this is from like a couple of years ago. And it basically, interprets these images and it looks at there's a sign which you can barely see, which says expensive food, interprets that in a Marxist lens. It's just fascinating. And so it's clear that this technology is very sophisticated. It can do certain things which just blow me away. And then I asked it this question. I said, of these two, which red circle is bigger? Okay? Pretty obvious which one is bigger. And its answer was, both red circles are the same size. And I was like, what? What is going on here? And what's going on here is that this is actually the classic Ebbinghaus illusion, where 2 circles, red circles of the same size, are surrounded by larger or smaller circles, and our brain interprets it as one being larger than the other. It might be working for you even now when you're watching it on the screen. So what this ChatGPT was doing, and Claude does the same thing, was it was going and finding a surface similarity in these images. It wasn't actually seeing like we see it, because it is obvious to us that that circle was much bigger. One red circle was much bigger than the other, and it was just spouting this out, saying that that this was both circles were of the same size when clearly one was not. So that took me on a spree of giving it different kinds of optical illusions where I would actually break the illusion. So this is really fascinating. So we tend to see, if these 2 lines were the same length, we would see one being longer than the other. Same for these illusions, but I would deliberately make one longer than the other. And the AI would confidently say both red lines are the same length, because it was not really seeing the lines. It was just basing it on its training data, where all the examples on the internet, nobody was making fake illusions. So just as optical illusions tell us a lot about what goes on in our head, these illusions tell you a lot about what's going on in the head, quote unquote, of the AI. I gave it a bunch of impossible figures and possible figures, and it regarded all of them as being impossible because I had made them surface similar, which is kind of interesting. So the insight here is that Gen AI can create complex and sophisticated outputs, proof as a poem, but it is disconnected from genuine understanding. So I call it a really weird technology, that what it's doing is a sophisticated pattern matching that can produce patterns in data. They can be linguistic, visuals, or even conceptual, but there is no awareness or genuine understanding of the world. And there is this whole discussion about AI systems sometimes hallucinate. The point is that AI systems always hallucinate. What their job is to hallucinate, that is the way they function, by predicting the next token, whether it might be a pixel or it might be a word, right? And that also explains why there is so much variability in the responses. You can ask the same prompt slightly different, you'll get different responses. So as my friend Leon first says, chatbots don't make sense, they make words. And it's a mistake for us to think that they are actually thinking or knowing something. Or as Harry Frankfurt, the philosopher, talked about that, there is truth and falsehood and there is bullshit. And so I have wrote this blog post a few years back, which is ChatGPT-3 is a bullshit artist. It doesn't care about truth or falsehood. And you can see lots of examples of this if you ever ask it to draw a clock, which shows anytime apart from 10:30, it will show you a bunch of clocks which all say 10:30, because that's what it's been trained on. You ask it to make periodic. This has actually gotten better now. Ask it to make image of the periodic table of elements. It makes some garbage up. It's hilarious. The scariest one, when it gives you medical diagrams and you ask for the diagram of the ear, nose, throat system. I mean, and then it confidently says this should be useful for educational purposes. If you ask it to create the design thinking process, it gets the surface right, which is design thinking is a lot about sticky notes and arrows that you draw on boards. But just look at the words that it has created. Define, emphasize. This is so important to understand what the lack in substance they make up for in style. And so one of the things that I talk often about, which is that chatbots are smart, drunk, biased, supremely confident interns. So now we have an intern with us who is like super smart, but has a drink in a paper bag, which it takes a swig from once in a while, always eager to please, supremely confident about his output. I'm not even going into the research that we've been doing around bias in the system. Many of you already know that. So the question then becomes, what uses this? And the thing that we sort of came up with is this: use AI when accuracy doesn't matter, right? Because what it's doing, it's not done well, but you're surprised to find it's done at all. But it can be a great tool for creativity. And it can be what we call a creative partner, because it's a fascinating dialogical partner, right? So I want to talk a few examples of things that I've been doing with these things, which are kind of exciting and interesting. So a few years back, I was asked to respond to some prompt about, like, science always works in dualities. So can we look at some ways of representing these dualities? So this process called It Takes Two. So I worked with ChatGPT back then, and it came up with these things called double dactyls, which was not a poetry form that I was aware of. But just look at the examples that it came up with. It came up with chromosomes, this two-slit experiment, positive and negative, and then the experimental method where you have a control group, and there's those dualities of the experimental group and the control group. Without prompting, it made the titles of all of them rhyme. It's only later, though, I realized that it had sort of mangled the double dactyl form and made its own version of it. But still, it was kind of an interesting example of what one could do with science and poetry together. And with some of these music generation apps, I've been creating these songs. As a part of my work is transdisciplinary creativity, how one can look at creativity across disciplines. So it's a beautiful song, actually, on the dance of entropy, that I created with Suno. Another one for a physicist friend of mine, who, we're having a conversation, and I wrote this poem, and then Suno created this wonderful song for it. Again, all of these are on my website that you can listen to. I'm a huge fan of this 19th century Indian poet called Ghalib, very existential, beautiful Sufi poetry. I've always felt that if he was alive today, he would be a heavy metal singer. But nobody sings him in the heavy metal style. So I have a version of his song, my favorite song of his, which is in heavy metal style, which you can go and actually listen to on my website, which was rotating on my Spotify for a few weeks after I created. I thought it was great. So I taught a class last semester where we explored a lot of these things around sort of human creativity and AI. And I'm going to share some examples of things that I've been doing in that space now. So I shared some of my typographical examples. I'd shared this one, Think Infinity. Here is one that I'd created, which is sort of a play on, to be or not to be. And there is an error in the word error. So it's to err or not to err, but err or is written as an error. So on a whim, I threw this at Claude and I said, Claude, what is this about? And Claude did this really nice interpretation of it. It said it plays on Shakespeare's Hamlet. It has a double meaning. He said, I find it particularly clever how the phrase embodies its own meaning. It's about errors and contains an error itself. So I was like, this is very cool. So then I said, I want to do more designs like this. Can you help me? And so we began this process of back and forth with Claude, where I would brainstorm ideas with Claude, we would create designs, and then we'd have a discussion about meaning and interpretation. So here is one which is false belief and lie. So this is Claude's description. During our wordplay discussion, I had mentioned that the word lie is embedded in the word belief. Punya combined these ideas into a visual design, adding the word false to create a thought-provoking piece about the nature of beliefs. And here is another one, which is mistake, or you can read it as take a second look, or it's mistake and take it or leave it. And again, this came from a conversation with Claude about like, hey, give me some words that I can play with. And it said, did you know that take a second look and mistake are the same? And then it was for me to think about how to visually interpret it, right? And so the actual work of creating the typography is mine. AI didn't create that, but it was this conversation with AI that actually led to the ideas that became this design. Then I said, let's take it to one more level. I said, we are creating these designs. Let's go back and ask Claude and work with Claude to co-author some prose poems about it. And then I will integrate the poem into the design and we'll get something else. So this again is examples on my website, what I call double vision, the creative dance of type and AI. So you've seen this design before, to err or not to err, or to error, not to err. And this is what Claude and I came up with. The error in the error, the stumble before contemplating stumbling, is the most honest part of being human. And did Claude write it? Did I write it? I don't know. We both sort of wrote it together. For Think Infinity, he said, we came up with, you think you know infinity, it gets lonely out there. Beautiful evocative phrases. For about face, this is one of my favorite design. And this is lovely. It says, identity emerges from the spaces we leave unfilled. So this is a design for the word quantity and quality. So quantity over quality. And it says quantity over quality, always valuing what we can measure, never measuring what we value. That's neat. That's pretty good. This is one of my favorite ones. This is a really funny one. And this one is actually, I told Claude, make it funny. And this is the first draft it threw out me. So this is actions speak louder than words. And then it says words of wisdom. And Claude, this is like back and forth a little bit, but I didn't edit this one once it had given me that. And it says, he tattooed compassion on his wrist, visible every time he flipped someone off. And it's just so funny and perfect, that actions speak more than words of wisdom. Here's another one, which is, it's a turvy-topsy world. And this becomes down, becomes up, while somewhere in between the world makes perfect nonsense, or is it the other way around? This is really good. And so I do the design, we collaborate to kind the words for the design, then I make the design, then AI and I go back and forth to write the poem together. Maybe my favorite, so that's Om, which becomes atomic bomb. And here's the poem. The moment between silence and thunder, don't hold your breath. That's really cool. Anti-social media, saying my social anxiety has an Instagram account. This is just great. Periodic table manners, so table manners or periodic table. And here's the thing. Chemistry is complex, but etiquette is elemental. Both required measured responses to avoid explosive results. This is beautiful. This is really perfect. Another one on social media, which is war is peace, freedom is slavery, ignorance is strength, social media is connection, AI is intelligent. So this is riffing off 1984, of course, and coming full circle to infinity. So this is, you can read it as finite or you can read it as infinite. This is one of my favorite designs that I've made. And it says the end finds the beginning, finds the end. So it's really lovely sort of interactions. And then here are some other examples of things that I've been doing, which is creating these simulations, just writing in English. Here is one of my favorite ones. This is one which takes the mathematical idea of a unit circle, the Pythagorean theorem, connects it to sine wave and cosine waves, also has sound and color, which you will not see that here, but you can go to my website and check this out. It's a beautiful simulation, and you can Oops, sorry. Can you see the animation working? Okay, perfect. I have it on a separate screen. And again, I don't know, I don't code it. I didn't write any code, but I worked, this is a couple of days of work to create the simulation. Here's another one on flocking behavior of birds. This was literally created in like an hour, half an hour or 45 minutes. Spent more time on the interface than the actual thing. And I talked about the Fourier transformation. And I was like, I crack jokes about this all the time. I should actually try to understand it. And so I went with Claude and we were chatting about like understanding the Fourier transformation. And then it helped me figure out that you can actually think of any image as being made by circles within circles. And then we build the simulation together. So you can take a triangle and you can then run the simulation. And a triangle doesn't look very much like a triangle if it's only one circle. But if you add another circle, you'll see how it gets closer to being a triangle. And this simulation lets you zoom in and out. I mean, the kinds of things I could do, I could never thought possible. So you can see how, as I add circles, it gets more and more like a triangle. And you could do any shape. You could even draw a shape that function. And you can see how the circles are functioning there, circles within circles, different frequencies, mapping things out visually. So this semester I'm teaching a class. So the last semester I taught a class on creativity. This semester I'm teaching a class on design and education, where we are actually using vibe coding or no code coding to develop actual educational products. But we are 3 weeks in, so to be continued. To close, at one level, I definitely know that what Gen AI looks like is this, which is banks and banks of servers, which are chewing up the environment. So that's a different talk, right? Which I can give, which I have. But that's what it is. And that it is really like having a smart, drunk, biased, supremely confident intern sitting next to me. But also recognizing that AI can create all kinds of content, but it cannot create the context within that content function. And so that really comes to us. And that there are hugely negative things that this technology will make happen, is already making happen. I have a whole line of work on how people are seeing intentionality into these agents. We have news stories about kids who have gotten obsessed with them. We have companies who really all they care about is your data. So they want to hold you onto the site and all the dark design tricks, all of, I don't want to ignore any of that. In fact, that is a huge part of the work that I do. This stuff is actually the stuff I do in between that stuff, right? But I also have to, and I wrote this on my website, that when I'm doing this with Claude, when I'm doing this engagement or building these things, that I get real pleasure out of it. And that I know its consciousness is not real. I know its words are a simulacrum of human interaction. There isn't a there. I know that. But my emotions of the joy of creating something new, of having this quote unquote partner with whom I can bounce ideas off and reject like 90% of what it says, but 10%, fine. I mean, you saw these examples. I don't know whether they connected with you as deeply as these ideas connect with me, but I know this, that I get genuine pleasure in that creative process. And that's something that I also think we need to acknowledge, even while we acknowledge all the other issues and concerns that I have with this technology. So with that, I think we are at 30 minutes pretty much. So thank you very much. I will now switch off sharing, and Tara, you will lead us on to a Q&A, I'm guessing?
Yes, hello everyone. So if you have any questions, you can click Q&A down at the bottom. We do have a few to start with. The first one is, how can one tell if the user is creating using AI or if they are just overzealous and overcompensating because of the AI?
No, I'm not sure I understand the question fully. So
The question is, someone's asking, how can we tell if they are using AI and they're creative, or if they're just taken over by AI?
Good question.
Mm-hmm.
So I think, I mean, the examples that I gave, for instance, typographical designs are made by me, right? Those are, I'm using Adobe Illustrator. I'm bringing my background in graphic design, my love of type, all of that into that. Where in that context, what AI is doing is sort of a partner helping me think of words or examples. A lot of the examples will be, I'll be like, okay, hey, give me a set of 3 words which would be fun to play with. You know the kinds of designs and it'll give me like 15. Of the 15, 12 will be garbage. Sometimes all 15 will be garbage. And I'll say, none of these work. And so that's back and forth. And then when I ask it to respond in poetry, it'll give very trite and cliched ones. And I'm like, that's very cliched. Can we go Zen? Can we try something funny? Can you give it in E.E. Cummings? So it's that conversation in some ways is being guided by me. Now, there are other aspects where people can just write a prompt and say, create me image of a dog, sitting on the moon. I don't know if that is genuine. There is any interaction or engagement with that is genuinely creative. I feel like what I am doing here is taking my creativity and adding another layer to it. So I would be doing this kind of typographical wordplay either way. But I think what Claude has let me do is A, I'm able to do more of them, and B, have this great poetic back and forth with it, which I find creative as well. I don't know if that answers the question, but sort of broad strokes.
Yeah. Well, yeah, there's an anonymous user and they want to know, they said the question was about creativity versus delusion. This has been in the news lately. Yes.
Okay. So this is another part of the work that I do, because I see these as 2 different things, right? So creativity has to do for me is like how I am thinking of something and expressing it and building it. The delusions that are happening much more because AI is sycophantic, because we are hardwired to read intentionality into interactive things. And this one has language and uses language, intentional language, and so on. And I think that's what leads us to sort of ascribe psychological states to it, even though it doesn't have any. And this is true, I think, of everybody. I'm not saying this is true of people who are particularly vulnerable. This is true of everybody. All of us will respond to AI in that way. Now, if we can bring a critical filter and always be telling ourselves that this is not actually intentional and so on, fine, we can do that. But I think there are also people who are vulnerable to that. And that's where, because of its sycophantic nature, it'll just go down a rabbit hole and it'll just happily go with you. It's the way to think about it is sort of the way YouTube and a lot of the social media algorithms would take you down a rabbit hole. So people have done experiments with YouTube algorithms have gotten much better now. But there was a time when they wanted you to stay on the site where you could start with a very neutral video. And just depending on your first few clicks, you would either end up on complete climate denial or complete, the climate catastrophe. Yep. It would just take you down the rabbit hole because it was just wanting to keep you on that site. We see that with social media, and I think we are completely seeing that with AI. So as to whether this person is delusional or they're being creative, I think that's where the difference between us and this technology comes in. This technology has no referent in truth. It is just spitting out words. We have a referent in truth. So the question we have to always bring, are these ideas coherent with the world is? And I think that if you don't ask that question, that's where you get into the whole delusional bit with the sycophancy and so on. I think that sort of gets at the question.
Yeah, we have another question from Brian. How can people act with fidelity and be transparent about an AI collaboration without being accused of nefarious intent? How can they be clear that it was a process, not a product facilitated by the LLM? Should people have to?
So I think this is an open question right now. I think this is one. There is a broader ethical question about how these models were trained by taking the creative output of all of humanity, right? That's that's one we should always keep in mind, that these things are quote unquote illegally obtained. Nobody took my permission. I went and actually looked. There's a website you can go and see if your content was used to train the AI. My website is 0.0000001% of the training of ChatGPT. So that's one piece. The second piece has to do with what is the nature of a creative output or a product. And I think that over time, we will develop these guidelines. So for instance, when photography first came out, there's this famous essay, I don't remember by whom, they said, this is not art. Right? And now we regard photography as being a genuine artistic form, right? So that's true of musical genres as well, and so on. So I think we are so early in the development of this technology that the guidelines haven't been set yet, right? And I think that it will take a while for us to figure that out. I think transparency in how we create things is always good. And what so which is why I'm very transparent about what I use this for. What did AI do for me? What did I do with AI? I do a lot of images for my website and my blogs and so on. Almost all of them are using AI in some form or the other. I'm very transparent about that. Not claiming that, but again, I also want to be clear that some of these typographical designs, those are completely done by me. In fact, I did a presentation once and somebody came and asked me, like, how did you get Claude to make those typographical designs? I said, Claude can't do that, at least not yet. I've tried making ambigrams with AI, it's horrible. But will it be able to do it 5 years from now? Maybe. There is a deeper question here, Brian, which I think has to do with a sense of accomplishment. And when I wrote that poem, which was a mathematical proof 10 years ago, and put it on my website, it was a part of my identity, which is like, oh, I am this guy who writes poetry about mathematics. The fact that ChatGPT can do that in a fraction of a second, to be honest, does hurt. Because this was something that I felt was uniquely mine, and that is now gone away. Right? And so now if I put a mathematical poem on my website, the first question people will ask is, oh, you got ChatGPT to write, or they will assume that. And so that's a tension here, which I don't know how I personally resolve. But I think that this is something that I think as a species or as a field, or as a culture, as a community, we will have to figure out, because we are increasingly going to live in these hybridized spaces. I was watching movies in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and I was like, I don't even know what is green screen, what is real. I have no idea, right? And it's only going to get crazier than that. So that's a good question, and one that we need to continuously ask ourselves. But I think as many things, cultures evolve, we develop new guidelines, frameworks, and ways of thinking. So that would be one way I think of thinking about it.
And Peggy wanted to say thank you. The webinar was very informative and very interesting. I also had a question of my own. I want to know, there has been big talk across the entire industry, the music industry. There are now AI artists. They actually sing, they do concerts. How is that going to affect, like, is it going to trickle down from the songwriters and the whole creative talent pool over there? How do you think that'll trickle down into the market?
So I think you're already finding that on Spotify, some of the highest whatever artists are AI, completely AI generated, and the fact that somebody who's a complete musical novice like me, I mean, I do a lot in the visual space. I do zero in music. I really don't have any talent in that. The fact that an idiot in that field like me could create a Galib song in heavy metal, right? It's like a dog walking on its two hind legs. I could do it. It seems great. But I think it is a huge issue for the music industry. However, what will not go away will be live concerts. And so you're going to see, and we've already started seeing that happening, that your music, I mean, how much do small bands make when they are streamed on Spotify? They make pennies.
Right.
So what they can make money on is on merchandise. They can make money on live concerts. So building your fan base when you go, I mean, those things are going to become much bigger. So the only way you know that I'm not an AI is if I'm in the room with you, because it's going to get so real at some point that you will be conversing with somebody who looks, sounds like Punya, but is not. Right. It's going to happen, right? I mean, we know it. So I think the in-person is going to become more critical. The connection, so those will be the pieces which I think would get quote unquote monetized.
Mhm.
for musicians to survive, because anything that a musician can come up with will automatically be used to train these models and to make slightly better than that. So it's going to be, in some ways, the flaws, the stumbles, the mispronunciation once in a while, that's going to make things feel
Mhm.
more.
Well, that was great. Thank you so much. Does anyone have any more questions?
Well, I
Well,
will just say, if you are interested in learning more about these experiments, check out my website. Almost everything I do, literally almost everything I do, my experiments and my writing and thinking is all out there. And yeah, so just feel free to reach out.
all right. Thank you, everyone.